just a few blocks from where we are right now is where the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 began. You may have heard about this. We had a fire back in the day. Seeing two head nods, that's good. So it's worth talking about the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. You may have heard a story about the fire. Could you do me a favor? If you heard the story of the fire, would you mind shouting out a buzzword for me? The story goes like this, so we can all get on the same page. Sunday, October 8th of 1871, Mrs. Catherine O'Leary. She leaves a kerosene lantern over in her barn on DeKoven Street, just 3 short blocks to our west, and that is when her cow, exactly her cow, Daisy, kicks that kerosene lantern into the hay, starting it, the barn, and eventually the city ablaze. It's one of the world's most famous stories at this point, 151 years later. I've never had a boat ride where nobody knew the story. It's not true, which is relevant, even though there are songs written about it still sung today. It's again, not true! And that is again, relevant. If you want to know the truth, I can totally respect that, but if you want to live a life dedicated to the truth, then you have to realize that you have to accept the truth, no matter what it is. And if you want to know the truth, we don't know. That's it. Are you glad you asked? We don't know how the fire started. Still today, it is still largely a mystery. And so, I think that's another reason that we keep the cow around. Besides the fact that it's such a good story, I will lose my job in 2022 if I don't talk about a fake story that was recanted 151 years ago. It's a good story. And so, it acts as sort of a placeholder for that mystery, as we can tell you what we do know. Is the flames rose 3 blocks to our west, over on DeKoven Street, and they were pushed to the river, where the flames were, of course, fueled by the water in the river, and more importantly, the top layer of copious amounts of oil-based industrial waste that fueled the fire into the city center, burning for 3 days, killing 300, more importantly, burning 18,000 structures to the ground, and leaving 1 in 3 with nowhere to call home. Devastating. And today, unironically, see not as only the best thing that happened to Chicago, but the best thing that ever happened to your city, too. The first Chicago was a bit of a mess. I call it an industrial Wild West. Really, you could come to Chicago before the fire, build whatever you wanted, wherever you wanted, however you wanted, so long as it built the city and made some money. Right? And that was great for our short-term growth. We were one of the fastest growing cities in written history. We were making money hand over fist. Unfortunately, zoning laws were not a thing. Building codes, fire codes. We were building our streets out of wood because it was faster and cheaper. We certainly weren't interested in paying taxes to fund a functioning fire department. When would we ever need one of those? So you can put yourself in the shoes of those Chicagoans looking at their city, rubble and ash, and saying, let's not do this again. Maybe overcorrecting a bit. And in the process, we became the birthplace of modern city planning. 22 years after the fire burned us to the ground, we welcomed 27 million visitors, over 27 times our population, for a World's Fair, designed by an architect by the name of Daniel Burnham, down the south side near Jackson Park. We did such a good job with these fairgrounds. One of the best World's Fairs ever. 22 years after we burned to the ground, we said, hey, would you mind doing another master plan, not for a fairgrounds, but for the entire city? And in 1909, he publishes the Plan of Chicago. And in that moment, city planning becomes a profession. And there is not a town or a city today that has been unaffected by that first textbook of city planning. And for that reason, it's not perfect. You shouldn't turn to it today as a catch-all, but it's pretty good when you consider things like the lakefront, the Riverwalk, Navy Pier, the grid system, diagonal streets, our boulevards, Upper and Lower Wacker Drive. 90% of Chicagoans, when they walk out their front door, they're less than 10 minutes walk to a public park. You might tell your friends and family, I was so surprised how clean Chicago is. But we have one of the most extensive alleyway networks in the world on purpose to tuck away our garbage before pickup. The thing I have yet to talk about on an architecture tour after the fire. We were able to build a city full of buildings worth talking about 150 years later. The idea that we'd all be here together without the fire burning us to the ground is at best unlikely and at worst impossible. So while the fire was devastating, and it also gave us quite literally everything else that we recognize and are known for today. It's say a lesson pretty well learned. Now, as we work our way back into the skyline, we're going to start by going to the far right to a 3-story tall aluminum statue on top of the Chicago Board of Trade, often eye-catching. That is Ceres, 3 stories tall. She's the Roman goddess of the harvest or of agriculture, pretty fitting, as it was an agricultural commodities exchange, Midwestern business. Although some people will say that is not the Board of Trade, that is Wayne Enterprises from the Batman Begins, which, bit of a technicality, but certainly a bit of a movie star too. As we then go to these 2 tall buildings in front of us, I call them our king and queen, sort of chess pieces, if you will. First up is 311 South Wacker. Actually came 15 years after the king. I think a bold design standing on its own, at the same time a great compliment to what is simply and arguably the main event, the granddaddy of them all. Tall, dark, and handsome. The Sears Tower. Maybe the Willis Tower, maybe. We're going to go with the Sears Tower, as it was built from Sears rubble in 1974. 1,451 feet tall, means it's 110 stories, 100 elevators, over 16,000 windows. The tallest building in the world for 24 years. Still the tallest in Chicago today. Architect Bruce Graham and structural engineer Fosler Kahn mirroring their bundled tube system and changing the skyscraper game. Always a great view, but while we're enjoying that, it's going to have to take a break behind this You Are Here map we saw earlier, and while we do, we're going to go left to one of my favorite parts of the tour. If you would, find a reflection in this glass facade and follow it for a moment. And then find a single pane of glass, and you'll see every pane is pinched in every corner. Slightly convex bubble glass. It's his nickname from bubble wrap, like you could pop the window with your thumb. And then remember, this building honors the river, with its curve, with the color of the glass, and even as we casually catch a reflection as we float by, it looks less like you're looking into a building, and more like water, a reflection in the river itself. And every day, thousands of people can find every excuse that they missed that, somehow hiding in plain sight. Less subtle is the true magnitude of the Sears to our right. You can even see through the bridge if you want. All the way up to the 103rd floor. See some glass boxes hanging off this side of the building. It's called the Ledge at Sky Deck. Essentially, there are people in those boxes, and they are taking pictures of us. So, look good if you care, guys. This is sort of our last view of the Sears. And if you would, take your eyes up to that antenna on top. And now that you're looking at the antenna, feel how tall the building is in your neck right now. I feel like that visceral experience is quite informative. And just as a gentle reminder to everybody, I didn't have you put your toes against the building and say, "Look up, honey, isn't that tall?" We're a block and a half away in the river, reclined. Okay, that's great. See, people are in good moods on a nice day. That's nice. Not always so cheerful from bridges. Those visceral, sort of unquantifiable moments of feeling something, I feel like are sort of the ways to round the corners of understanding. Like those antennae on top, they're the same height as this black box to our left. 1 to 1. Nothing comes close because it was the tallest building in the world for 24 years. Still the tallest in Chicago today. It's called the Willis Tower legally, but it was called the Sears Tower for almost 30 years. The entire time it was the tallest building in the world. So if you're talking to an older Chicagoan, especially Chicagoans in general, I'd recommend sticking with Sears Tower. You'll just get better directions, you'll make friends more easily, you'll have a better time, which is what I want for you. I've done my due diligence as your guide. You have the information you need to succeed. As we go right to the Merc. The Mercantile Exchange Center is from the 80s, although it kind of tells us that in its design. The office towers give it away. Because most likely, if you were